Hello, everybody. My name is Jonathan Benger. I'm the Chief Medical Officer and Deputy Chief Executive at NICE in the UK. And welcome everybody joining us for this webinar today to talk about NICE's review of our highly specialised technology, HST criteria. And welcome to those joining us internationally, as well as those who are joining us from the UK. It's really good of you to make time. And what I want to do in the next 45 minutes is talk through our thinking around this review, how we're approaching the review, what the ambition of the review is, what we will and won't have in scope for that review, so that you understand our plans and so that you're well prepared to contribute when we open our consultation, which we are hoping to be able to do in December of this year. Now, today is an introduction. I want to talk about the principles that we're going to work to. I'm not going to get into the detail of criteria because we are still working on those ideas. But I do want to ensure that we engage as many of our interested parties and stakeholders as possible. And that's what this webinar today is all about, is really engaging people, bringing you up to speed with our thinking. But I don't want to get into I won't get into the detail in relation to individual criteria or particular decisions or particular routings that have happened in the past. There will be an opportunity to ask questions, and we will endeavour to answer as many questions as we possibly can. It may be that we won't be able to get to all of the questions, but everything that you type in, all the questions that you ask and the comments that you make, we will collect and ensure that they do feed into the work that we are undertaking right now. So thank you again for joining us. I've got a few slides and we'll just run through those slides initially and then ask you to come back to us with questions that you may have. So I've introduced myself, and as I said, this is all about a review of the HST criteria. So the main thing I think to bear in mind is that our review is taking place in the wider context of NICE's role in the health and care system. NICE celebrated its 25th birthday this year, and we've had 25 very successful years, beginning back in 1999 with our first technology appraisals. And we strive to ensure that we always maintain our core values of independence, transparency and rigour, that we listen very carefully to our stakeholders, that we consult widely, and that we respond to the system around us. And in the UK at the moment, the health and care system is under a huge amount of pressure. It's been the focus of a recent review by Lord Aridazi, and we are confident that the new government will bring forward important measures to improve the health and care system and to drive innovation within healthcare and within the UK more broadly. Our job at NICE is to ensure that we do maintain our core values, but also that we are listening carefully to our stakeholders and that we remain really relevant to the work that's going on in the health and care sector. So the healthcare system is changing in a variety of ways. I've talked about pressure. There is also obviously an important focus on shared decision making between patients and their clinicians, a huge growth in innovation in the life sciences sector, in digital technologies, and increasingly we are using a much wider range of data to base the decisions that NICE makes on. So our guidelines, our guidance products use not just research data from randomized trials, but also observational data and real world data. And as I've alluded to, it's important that our core purpose stays the same, but it's also important that we continue to adapt, grow, and develop. And this review fits into that ambition. So the key areas of our transformation focus on ensuring that our guidance is more timely and easy to use, more usable, that it has a greater demonstrable impact, and importantly that it's relevant and immediately relevant to our core stakeholders across the health and care system. And those are the guiding principles that we are using to inform our transformation. Now, this year, we've taken the decision to refine or review the current HST criteria. And one of the catalysts for that has been the fact that we've introduced a new prioritization board into NICE. So when I was appointed as the Chief Medical Officer in January last year, one of my first tasks was to review our approach to prioritisation. And I found that we had 6 different committees and groups working across NICE to prioritise. And we've brought those all together into a single coordinated board that I have the honour of chairing, and that makes the prioritisation decisions as to where we're going to focus. And in taking on those functions, one of the functions that the prioritisation board is assuming is the decision around routing of technology appraisals either into the standard STA approach or into an HST. And so in moving the responsibility for that within NICE, it's given me and my team, working very closely with our medicines evaluation team and other colleagues across NICE, the opportunity to review the criteria and say, how are they working, how are they performing, and are they as good as they could be? And of course, this is a journey. It's not a destination. We're always working to listen to stakeholders and to improve what we do and how we do it. So as part of that journey, we first inherited, as it were, the HST criteria from the advisory group for National Specialised Services. That was back in 2013. There were 7 criteria at that time. And we, in 2021, 2021, 2022, we consolidated those into 4 criteria. And we did that to try to improve clarity and also to ensure that we continue to reflect the vision of HST, the ambition of HST, which is a very particular programme with a set of very particular important concepts that underlie it. And I'll come on to those very shortly. So we recognised that update in 2021 was a definite improvement, but we also recognised that more could be done. And in particular, what we want to try and do is make sure that the criteria that we're using are as clear, transparent and consistent as possible, so that our colleagues in the life sciences industry understand those criteria and understand how they are applied, and that we are confident that we are doing that in a consistent way that fully reflects the underlying vision of HST. And we also recognise that the actual process by which HST applications are submitted, considered and decided upon could always be improved, and we want to ensure that we look at that at the same time. So it's a review of the criteria and it's a review of the process to try and make things simpler, clearer and consistent, and to address some of the feedback that we have received over the longer term and particularly over recent years. So the HST vision is a very important one. And it's a really important programme for colleagues in the life sciences sector, but in particular for patients with rare diseases. And the reason it's important is that we recognised some time ago that there was a high risk of considerable disadvantage for patients with rare diseases, rare but severe diseases, in that there was a lack of incentive for pharmaceutical companies to bring forward new and effective treatments. And as a result of that, it was also difficult, because of the rarity of conditions, to generate high quality research evidence that could be used as the basis for decision making. And so the risk is that people with rare but very serious lifelong debilitating diseases would be substantially disadvantaged by the lack of access to effective treatments and a lack of research because of the rarity of the disease, and that would be through no fault of their own. So the HST programme is designed to be used in exceptional circumstances. It's designed to be used for very rare diseases, and where those diseases are severe, lifelong, the number of patients is very small. There are limited or no treatment options already available. And when research and development is very challenging because of the rarity and uniqueness of the disease. And so that means that the number of technologies that will be eligible will be small, but it also means that there is a route to ensure that patients with rare, severe diseases are not wholly disadvantaged by the current system. Now, it's an important step, because what it is endeavouring to do is ensure that there is equitable treatment access for smaller populations who are unfortunate enough to have a rarer disease. And in so doing, that has an impact on the wider opportunities and opportunity costs that exist in the system. So if one were taking a truly and solely utilitarian view, you might take the view that any particular initiative should be trying to do the most for the most people. But if we always took that view, then people with rare diseases would be substantially disadvantaged. And so the HST criteria is about balancing that, so that we recognise that the effect is to change the way that funding is delivered, but it also ensures that small populations do get equitable treatment access under certain conditions, and it drives innovation, it drives research, and it drives development in science and in industry, which is important. And so that vision that underpins the HST criteria is one that we've been reviewing, but we're not changing it. So we are not proposing to change the HST criteria. We are not intending to, we're not intending to change the HST vision, the principles that sit behind it, but we do want to make sure that the criteria are as clear as possible in reflecting and ensuring that we deliver on that vision and that we do so consistently. So that vision is really important. One of the big challenges with our current criteria is that when we looked at the vision and that kind of idea about encouraging research and innovation for rare conditions, securing fair and equitable access, we didn't always feel that all of the criteria fully taken together fully reflected the HST vision. And so we really want to ensure that the criteria themselves stand alone as a true and accurate reflection of the vision, so that the vision is translated into criteria, and those criteria reflect the vision, and those criteria are used consistently and transparently in order to assess each application. And that's a really important step for us in terms of ensuring that in updating and reviewing and revising the criteria, we do so in a way that is specifically and explicitly linked to the HST vision itself. So we've established a task force internally at NICE. We have looked very hard at all of the HST decisions that have been made before, both positive and negative ones. We've looked very hard at our history and how these criteria have evolved over time. We've consulted with experts around the vision, around the challenges in this particular area. And what we really want to do is ensure that we take those four criteria and add to them in ways that make it much clearer as to what they mean and what is required to satisfy those criteria. That's not adding additional hurdles or burden, it's enhancing clarity. So it's saying, on the one hand, this is how this links to the vision, this is how this criteria reflects the vision, and statements that say that in particular define words that have the risk of being ambiguous. So there are many words in common parlance that people use, but which can cause confusion and which can be interpreted in different ways. So, for example, if we use the word significant, we have to define what we mean by significant, because significance varies for different people at different times. Similarly, if we want to use the word innovative, then we have to be clear what we mean by innovative and what would count as being innovative and what wouldn't count as being innovative. And so these kinds of words are really important and they need to be defined. Interestingly, even when we talk about the kind of numbers of patients that might be affected by a particular disease or the incidence of a disease in a population, or the prevalence of disease, all of these terms have important definitions and all of them need to be defined. So numerators and denominators all need to be carefully considered so that in making an application, colleagues can understand exactly the criteria that the prioritization board will apply, and the prioritization board can then apply those criteria specifically. And applications will be better informed, and we sincerely hope there will be greater clarity and transparency around the decision making. Less controversy, less frustration, and greater clarity. Now, of course, it is a journey. It's not going to be perfect, and we're not going to get it absolutely right. But we will be consulting, and we need your help to ensure that the work that we do is a genuine step forward and makes it easier to understand, easier to prepare an application, easier to submit and achieve a result. So this is all about clarity. What it is not about, and that comes up on the next slide, this is not about changing the vision. It's not about changing the underlying principles. And neither is it about moving the goalposts or changing the bar. So overall, this review is designed to not increase or decrease the number of technologies that are routed into the HST programme. It is designed to continue at the same effective cost to the NHS and opportunity cost, but in so doing, we want to make this a much clearer and more transparent and more consistent process. So the review will be cost neutral from the overall point of view of the NHS and society, and we will be very careful to review previous decisions and to look at what the impact would have been of the new criteria on previous decisions, and we will be monitoring this very carefully to ensure that we are not making it easier or harder, and that we are remaining true to the fundamental vision of HST that will be translated more clearly and more consistently into the updated criteria. We want to provide that additional guidance, those definitions that clarify some of the murkier words and help people to understand whether the technology does qualify, and help people to prepare an application that can be smoothly and effectively assessed. And the objectivity is important, the definitions are important, and the consistency is important. And we sincerely hope, that this work will allow a greater alignment, I say less frustration, less confusion, and less of a sense of uncertainty in the whole process. And by improving that process of selection and routing, ultimately patients will get treatments faster, decisions will be made more efficiently, and the system will benefit as a whole. And we will continue to be able to provide important life-changing treatments for patients who are unfortunate enough to have a rare type of disease. So we have 4 criteria at the moment. Our intention is to keep 4 criteria. As I said, we don't want to make this easier or harder. What we do want to do is link each of those 4 criteria much more explicitly through to the overarching HST vision to develop those criteria, and to ensure that we provide that kind of detail to enhance clarity, that we define otherwise ambiguous terms, and that we use qualifying statements such as, when we say this, we mean that, but not this. If this is the case, then that would be positive. If something different was the case, then that wouldn't qualify. And so that people can be much clearer in terms of the approach that we're taking. And those statements, I think, will help. It is necessary for all 4 criteria to be met. I'm aware that there has been discussion about flexibility in the HST programme and the way that criteria are applied. My personal view at the moment is that flexibility actually introduces ambiguity. And the problem with suggesting that there is flexibility is that flexibility could be applied in either direction in a way that is less transparent and less consistent. And so I'm keen to find ways of improving our definitions and the application of those definitions so that the concept of flexibility is no longer required, and we can be much more objective. Now, of course, there is always going to be an element of subjectivity in interpretation. That can't be escaped. But we, in the prioritization board, are already getting used to doing a lot of prioritization work, considering a lot of information. And it's a very wide group with a lot of expertise, including lay representation. And we are optimistic that we can improve things. It will never be perfect, but we do want to improve and enhance clarity and the experience for those who are applying, and the certainty for patients with rare diseases. So we'll be undertaking a lot of engagement, and we will be preparing and developing our updated 4 criteria, looking very carefully at each element of that. linking every element through to the HST vision, which remains unchanged. And if everything goes to plan, in December we will proceed to consultation, although that's not yet certain. It depends a great deal on the time that is required to ensure that we get the very best draft to you for your consideration. And if we are able to go to consultation before the end of the calendar year, we are again optimistic that we could potentially publish final revised criteria on the 31st of March and then use them going forward from the next financial year. There's a lot of work to be done. We have an excellent team, and we will be engaging extensively. We are particularly interested in areas where improvements could be made, where there has been ambiguity or uncertainty, and also in how we can enhance the process. And we will be working very hard to ensure that we do not change the barriers, as it were, the goalpost, the hurdle, that we don't change the threshold by which HST criteria are identified and routed into that programme. And so that's an important point to emphasise before we proceed to consultation. We are already engaging with stakeholders, and we're already listening to you, and we will continue to do so throughout the process. So, as I've said, we anticipate December will be the start of the consultation. It'll be live on the website as usual. We will be keeping regular updates coming out on our social media channels as to how things are progressing. We will be engaging our key stakeholders, many of whom I know are on the call. We will be listening to views. We are very keen to make this a clearer and more effective process. We are very committed to staying true to the HST vision, and we are very committed to continuing to find a way of delivering effective treatments to patients with severe and debilitating diseases. So thank you very much for listening. My office in the clinical directorate email address is on the screen. I can see we've got lots of questions and comments, which is fantastic. And what we'll do now is move to address as many of those as we can over the next 20 minutes or so. My excellent colleagues in the media team at NICE are sending me through the questions. The first is around the threshold for decision making. We are not in a position at NICE to change our threshold because of the impact that has on the wider health and care system. We are certainly in a position to improve the decision making, the quality of decision making, and the clarity of that decision making. But as I've said, we'll be monitoring this very closely to ensure that we don't increase or decrease the threshold and therefore change the overall routing of particular technologies into HST. I have talked. The second question is about medical devices and health technologies that are not pharmaceuticals, and that's a very good question. I have tended to refer specifically to medicines. In fact, the HST program is theoretically applicable to any medical device that meets thresholds that we've described. As far as I'm aware, we've never received a request, and I don't think we've ever routed anything into the HST program that is a medical device. That clearly there are some complexities involved in that. However, it does apply, and it's not impossible. And so, yes, medical devices are at least theoretically included. In practical terms, I don't think we've yet seen one progress into the HST program, but it's not impossible. So the next question is, I'll read this one out because it's a little bit longer. If a product has gained reimbursement through HST, then another one or two products with the same indication that enter the NICE pathway, will they go down the HST or STA route, bearing in mind the quality threshold will be much lower in the STA route for the later competitor products? So the answer is that, yes, the quality threshold is very different between HST and STA, single technology appraisals, and the standard route. the HST criteria would need to be applied on each occasion. So if a second technology came along for the same condition, then we would need to look at that technology according to the criteria. And one of those criteria, as I've alluded to, relates to innovation. So that's an important consideration. And those criteria also relate to whether there are existing effective treatments. So in considering a second or third technology that was submitted to the HST program, then potentially those second and third technologies would find it harder, I think, because the first technology would have probably met some of the innovation criteria that the second and third might not. And then the criteria around existing treatments would also be an area where potentially we'd have to review that. So the broad answer is we will consider each treatment on each application and each technology on their merits. It's not a decision that we would make in advance. We would have to consider each application one at a time. Okay. So next question is around the addition of qualifying statements and whether they will increase act to increase the difficulty of securing a routing. It's a good question. I think the point about qualifying statements is to provide more information and more detail, but not to add an additional criterion or an additional barrier. So the purpose of the statement is to make it much clearer to all parties as to what qualifies and what doesn't qualify. And we're looking at ways of saying, kind of, this would qualify, and on the other hand, this would not qualify. So that by using examples, we improve clarity in the system. And as I've alluded to in the earlier presentation, it's also about defining difficult words. They're often in common parlance that people use regularly, but which potentially are themselves a source of challenge. And say even the number of people that are affected by a particular disease is something that we need to do additional work to ensure that we get that definition exactly right, and so that we all agree on exactly how many people stand to benefit from a particular technology. Okay, next question. Lots of rare diseases have varying epidemiology numbers due to lack of data. In cases like these, what would be the best approach for calculating prevalence and incidence? So what we intend to do here is I suspect we're going to settle on point prevalence, which is quite well defined, but that is again up for discussion and consultation. I think where there's uncertainty, then we would ask those making a submission to endeavour to identify, to the best of their knowledge, what the prevalence is, with evidence to support that where available, and then we would review that, and if it was a reasonably argued point that we use the best available data, then I anticipate that we would accept that, and where possible, we can also endeavour to identify from parallel sources whether the numbers presented seem correct. But I appreciate that there is, for some diseases, there is real uncertainty about the number of patients that might be affected, and so we would need to work to achieve an agreed kind of estimate, working with those making the submission and our own sources, and we will have to work together to do the best we can to get the best numbers and therefore the best result. Okay, got that one. Sorry, I'm just, because more questions are appearing, the screen's moving down. Does NICE limit or have a target in place for the number of HST appraisals it undertakes in a year? And the answer is no. That's not the point. So the point is whether the technology reaches the required threshold, as it were, and meets all four criteria. If it does, and there are lots of them, then more go through. Because anything else would be unfair in the broader sense. For us, very importantly, as I've alluded to, we need to look retrospectively and say, well, if we had been using these criteria, what would the result have been on previous decisions that we've made? Prospectively, it's much harder. My sense of the pipeline and the kind of horizon scanning is that we may see more applications to the HST program. I think that's quite likely. And that may lead, if they meet the criteria, to more HST routing decisions. But we're not working to a quota. We are working to a set of criteria, and this is very much around ensuring that we have some greater clarity. I'm aware that colleagues have sometimes been frustrated with the decisions that have been made, that there's been a lack of agreement, and there will always be interpretation, there will always be elements of disagreement. But I really want to try and use this opportunity to minimise those, to learn from the work that we did back in 21 that was effective. And it was a good big step forward, don't get me wrong. But as I say, it's a journey, and no doubt, given more time, we will come back and endeavour to improve this further as far as we can. So next question, why must the review be cost neutral? And that's a policy decision in relation to the thresholds that we use. So at the moment, the threshold is one that if we were to change that threshold around cost neutrality, and for example, change it in a way that meant that more medications were routed into the HST program, that would have an implication for funding that would need to be agreed by the Department of Health and Social Care. The VPAG settlement is very helpful in this regard, but NICE is not in a position to act unilaterally to change key thresholds where that has implications for the overall drugs budget. And we stand ready to respond to requirements of effectively the UK taxpayer, the British public, as articulated through our government. But we're not in a position to unilaterally make changes to the thresholds that we are currently working to. And therefore, this review is aimed to not move those thresholds. As I say, if different policy decisions are made by an incoming government, then we will respond to those. But at the moment, our job is to ensure that we continue along the lines that we have already been instructed to pursue. But who knows? A change of government, I'm sure that all of these things, I know all of these things are being discussed. And so that may lead to some changes, not just in HST, but in other areas. And as I say, NICE stand ready to enact the will of the British public as articulated through our government, because that's our job. We're here to get the best care to patients fast, and also to ensure good value for the UK taxpayer. Next question, will there be an opportunity for companies to engage with NICE a lot in the process to see if HST is suitable for them? And the answer is yes, we do want to engage companies sooner in the process. I would strongly recommend engaging with NICE advice, but also what we hope will happen is that greater clarity around the criteria will make it easier for colleagues in the life sciences industry to identify whether their product is likely to be an HST or not, and will help them to ensure that they produce the evidence around that. So it may avoid wasted effort by saying, okay, it's clear that this won't qualify as an HST, or it may enhance the efficiency of an application by ensuring that that can be directed specifically to the criteria. We do want to improve the process. We want to streamline the process. We don't want to waste anybody's time or anybody's money. And what we actually want to do is make sure that we are responsive, and that so there is definitely an opportunity to engage. And I think the clarity of the criteria will help people to understand whether their technology is likely to be routed into the HST program. Next question is a little bit longer without. The HST committee perform a vital role in ensuring the criteria apply consistently. What are the criteria for selection for the HST committee? What is the process for reviewing and re-electing the committee and ensuring that the approach remains progressive yet consistent? Will the review of the HST committee and its governance be in scope? So at the moment, the scope does not include the HST committee itself. This is all about the routing decision. So this is about the decision as to whether something is routed into the standard program or into the HST program. And we are not currently planning to make changes to the methodology, to the process, and to the way in which HSTs are actually conducted once routed. This is purely related to the routing decision. Next question. Again, I'll read this one out. Once the revision and refinement of the HST criteria has been published and implemented, estimated April 2025, will there be a time window for life sciences companies to respectively challenge a previous routing decision against the previous HST criteria? So the answer, unfortunately, is no. We have to go forwards, not backwards. Excuse me. So the criteria will apply from 2025 onwards. They won't be reapplied retrospectively. So I appreciate that will be disappointing, but we cannot go back and revisit all of our previous HST decisions. It's not practical, it's not feasible, and of course, if we were really going to do that, we'd have to do all the no's as well, all the yeses and all the no's. And so that would be I think, an untenable situation to find ourselves in. As I've alluded to, we do need to do a lot of retrospective work to look at the thresholds and look at the results, which we would expect to be the same. This is about clarity, and it's not about changing the criteria in terms of the goalposts, the thresholds that are required, or the underlying HST vision. Okay, let's see what we've got here. Given the statement around innovation and how that may be applied to second and third products, is the innovation criteria a barrier to competition and driving value in the market? So I think this is an important question, and it's one that we're thinking about quite hard at the moment. And from our perspective, the HST vision is about driving innovation. So it depends a great deal on whether the technology is innovative according to a reasonable definition of innovation, and these exist within the NHS and the life sciences sector, or whether it is in effect a relatively minor variation on an existing theme. And we do want to stimulate and drive innovation. And so that it's important that that is considered in our thinking. I think we'll need to consult quite widely on this and think quite hard about how to make this right, so that we are driving innovation in the market, but we're doing that in a way that creates as fair and as level a playing field as possible for everybody working in the life sciences sector. And there is a risk, particularly because the quality thresholds are so different in these two programs, of distorting effects that we need to avoid if at all possible. And so I think that's an area that we will be focusing on, and it's also an area that we will do value further input from colleagues across the board within the life sciences sector and the pharmaceutical industry, and during consultation. So next question, is December the best time to consult? No, frankly. It's speed versus kind of convenience, I guess. We've got two factors involved here. One is that we would like to complete the HST review in time to implement in the start of the new financial year. Two is that we have a number of important consultations that are currently scheduled for the last quarter of this financial year. And we know from colleagues that people find it difficult to respond to multiple consultations simultaneously, not surprisingly. So in planning our own program, we want to make sure that we give people plenty of opportunity and we're not bombarding people with consultations simultaneously. And this was a program that we felt we could bring forward fairly quickly in order to start the consultation process promptly. Will of course take account of the effect of the Christmas break, which tends to slow things down a bit, and we'll factor that into the timing. But I think it's important that we make progress, and therefore that's the current plan. But it could change, and we will keep that under close review. Next question is, thanks for the presentation. Thank you. Please could you confirm and advise how NICE would approach the transition to the HST criteria? Any insights into the time frame for this once the consultation process is concluded and the new criteria in operation? So our intention is to operationalise the criteria effective from the 1st of April 2025, if everything goes to plan. I think we will need to work very carefully with any colleagues industry that are bringing forward proposals around that time to work out how best to manage those, to give them a fair hearing. Excuse me. And we have to start somewhere, and that's a very convenient and sensible date to begin the new criteria. And we will work with colleagues who have applications in the pipeline to manage that transitional period in the most sensible and effective way. Next question is, if we disagree with a NICE HST routing decision, who do we provide counter evidence to, and what's the email address? So if there are specific challenges to HST routing, I mean, if you write to NICE at nice.org.uk, you get get straight into our inbox, and we will route any input immediately to the right team. Our consultations have on our web pages have specific addresses for responses to various consultations and various decisions. We are very, very much open to consultation and discussion. So if you have concerns, please do send them in. Question: will the cap of 500 people for technology with multiple indications be consulted on, in particular whether this should be captured within budget impact considerations rather than being an HST criteria? There's currently numerous technologies that may be able to address unmet needs in more than one rare disease that individually would meet HST criteria but together may not. And yes, that's a slightly technical but important question, and any issues in relation to that, and that certainly does include multiple indications. That is part of the criteria review that we're looking at. That will be part of the consultation, and there will be opportunities to comment on that. The question is correct that there are challenges if a single highly innovative technology has potential multiple applications across multiple patient groups, and it depends a great deal on whether it's approaching symptoms or the underlying cause of the disease, and to some extent mechanism of action. I don't think it's sensible to get into the detail in this particular webinar, but it's an area that we will consult on, and that we are actively considering how best to manage that tension that the questioner correctly highlights. Next question: can you expand on the pre-consultation engagement you plan to undertake? So we are engaged. Well, initially we discussed this within NICE, within our board and executive, and we're starting that process now. We will also be engaging and have already begun engagement with some of the key industry representative bodies, so ABPI, for example, and others, in order to start to engage in and get some feedback and start a dialogue. And we'll also be engaging with our colleagues in the Department of Health and Social Care, NHS England, and key patient groups in relation to rare diseases. And we are really keen. This is the kickoff from our perspective, and I appreciate that some colleagues would have liked to have heard a bit more detail. But what I don't want to do is come here and tell you that we've already made our mind up, or we've made our decisions, because that's not true. I think what's important is that we are open, that we talk, that we listen, and that we do our very best to improve these criteria, and then we consult, and that's always been NICE's way. And I want to approach this in an open way, and I want to start the dialogue with our key stakeholders, with those who have the most interest in this area, and listen to their concerns. I just reiterate that our remit does not include changing the thresholds involved. That is a different and separate conversation, and I appreciate that many people on the call would like to see those thresholds changed, but that unfortunately is not part of the consultation that we are engaging, or the work that we are engaging in at present at this time. Okay, the webinar is due to finish right now, so we've got to a lot of questions. I fear we haven't got to them all, and I'm sorry. My colleagues have been furiously sending them through to me, and I've been trying to get through as many as possible. We haven't got to them all, but we are looking at all of your feedback right now, and we are working through our consultation with our key stakeholders, and we will continue to do our very best to improve the quality of the work that we do, to improve the clarity of these criteria, and to do so in a way that builds on the excellent work that's been done to date, and that takes that a little bit further down that journey. It's a long journey, to improve clarity, consistency, and to do so in a way that we hope will reduce uncertainty, will reduce frustration, and will allow us to achieve a smooth process, that it will ultimately benefit all parties, and most importantly of all, those patients with rare diseases, who desperately need innovative treatments be made available to them to substantially improve the length and quality of their life. Thank you very much for your time today. Thank you for listening to me, and we will stay in touch. Keep an eye on our social media channels. Consultation will be coming. We'll be listening. We'll be engaging. We'll be doing our best to get this a little bit better. And thank you for supporting us, and thank you for continuing to support NICE. Have a good day, everybody.